Finally, the old witch is dead. That's what my daughter Justine whispered to her husband as she poured herself a glass of wine less than 2 hours after believing I had taken my final breath. I heard it all. Every word, every chuckle, every vile thing they said when they thought I was gone. If you're watching this right now and you've ever wondered who would miss you if you disappeared, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, because I promise you, the answers might destroy you. My name is Margaret Foster, and I'm 72 years old. I was once a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a woman people leaned on until I became inconvenient. After my husband Harold passed, I gave everything I had left to my children, financially, emotionally, physically, because I believed that's what love was. I believed they loved me back. But over the years, I began to fade. Birthday calls turned into text messages. Sunday dinners became quick check-ins. They stopped visiting altogether unless there was something to gain. A house deed that needed signing, a babysitter in a pinch, or a guilt-trip conversation about how lonely I must be. But no one actually showed up for me. The final crack came on my 72nd birthday. I sat in my living room alone for 12 hours, dressed in the same blouse Justine once called her favorite on me, waiting for someone, anyone, to remember. No call, no card, not even a mistake. It was like I had already died and no one noticed. That night, I poured a glass of wine and whispered out loud, "If I died tonight, how long would it take them to find me?" That question spiraled until it became a plan. I called my oldest friend Eleanor, a retired hospice nurse who owed me more than one favor. "I need you to help me disappear," I said. She didn't flinch. "When?" We forged the details carefully. I'd suffer a sudden cardiac event in my sleep at Eleanor's cottage, where I'd supposedly moved for a few weeks of rest. Eleanor had a contact at a private funeral home and a discreet friend at the county coroner's office. No autopsy, no family pushback, a quiet cremation, a modest memorial. I wanted to see it all, to hear what they'd say, to watch who cried, and to find out if any of them truly remembered the woman who raised them. The night before the fake death, I packed a single suitcase, kissed the photo of Harold on my dresser, and left my keys on the table like a silent goodbye. Then I climbed into the guest bed at Eleanor's and took the medication that would slow my pulse just enough to mimic the chill of death. In the morning, she called Justine and said simply, "She passed peacefully in her sleep." I watched the news unfold from the other room through Eleanor's laptop. My daughter posted on Facebook within 20 minutes. "R.I.P. to the strongest woman I've ever known. We'll miss you, Mom." Comments flooded in, people I hadn't spoken to in years offering empty condolences. "She always spoke so highly of you, Justine. She was so proud of her family." The same family who hadn't seen me in person in over 7 months. I felt my stomach turn. The lies were so slick they practically slid off the screen. The memorial was scheduled for the following Saturday at Justine's home, which she insisted was what Mom would have wanted. Eleanor and I set up a hidden camera in the living room and connected it to her laptop in real time. I watched from a room away, a ghost peeking through the veil, and what I saw nearly stopped what was left of my heart. My 3 children arrived, Gregory with his Bluetooth in, pacing and taking calls, Peter in sunglasses as if he were some celebrity mourner, and Justine in a tight black dress and too bright lipstick. There was no sorrow, no gravity. They laughed. They poured drinks. They hugged distant relatives with hollow warmth. But what broke me most was when Justine took a folder out of her handbag and whispered to Gregory, "We can have the house on the market by next week. It's already in my name. She signed it over last year, remember?" My hand shot to my chest. That wasn't true. I had never signed it over. I had entrusted her with managing my paperwork after a bad fall left me unable to grip a pen for months. She had stolen the house out from under me while calling me Mom and saying I was such a trooper. Gregory asked about my bank accounts. "She left anything in the trust?" he murmured. Peter shrugged. "She was always private about that stuff. Doesn't matter. We'll get access soon." They were tearing apart my life like it was leftover cake at a wake. I sat frozen, watching the people I had given everything to pick through my legacy like vultures on bone. They didn't cry. They didn't reminisce. They didn't even pretend. They planned. They calculated. They celebrated. I was never grieving material to them. I was just an obstacle they had outlived. Eleanor found me shaking in the guest room. I looked up, eyes burning. We need a lawyer now. Because I had died to see the truth, and what I saw wasn't family. It was fraud. And I was done pretending I was too weak to do anything about it. Charles Merriweather was the kind of attorney who never raised his voice because he never had to. He knew the law like it was his native language, and when Eleanor introduced us, he didn't flinch at the absurdity of my situation. I told him everything. How I'd faked my death legally without creating a death certificate, how Justine had likely forged the deed transfer using old power of attorney paperwork, and how my children were already planning to liquidate my assets before my ashes had even been faked. Charles listened silently, tapping the end of his pen against a legal pad. "You're not dead, Miss Foster," he finally said, "but they're going to wish you stayed that way." With his help, I revoked the outdated will, wrote a new one under my maiden name, Margaret Elaine Carleton, and transferred every asset into a living trust with Eleanor as co-trustee and Sophie, my youngest granddaughter, as contingent beneficiary. We filed fraud complaints against the title transfer Justine had executed and froze all legal activity on my estate. The house was pulled from the market before the listing even went live. Justine didn't know it yet, but her paper empire was built on a lie, and that lie was dissolving by the hour. Gregory tried to access my accounts through the bank, but was promptly denied. Charles had already locked everything under legal seal. The more they reached for my legacy, the more it slipped from their hands. And yet, even as I moved the pieces like a quiet storm behind the curtain, I couldn't help but feel the kind of grief you don't cry over. The slow grief of realizing your children have been strangers for years, and you were the last one to notice. A week later, the calls started. Justine left a breathy message on Eleanor's phone. "There's a problem at the title office. They're saying Mom isn't dead. That can't be right. Can you call me back?" Gregory emailed Charles pretending to be the sole executor and asked for access to the house and financials. Peter texted some pathetic version of, "Hey, are you okay?" to a disconnected number. I said nothing. I watched. I waited. I prepared. And when Justine finally marched into the county clerk's office with her real estate agent, all dolled up to sell the house she thought she owned, she was handed a sealed legal order that read, "Title under dispute, legal owner alive, all activities suspended." The woman behind the counter said she turned white as a sheet. She should have. 2 days later, the probate hearing they had scheduled to fast-track the transfer of assets proceeded as planned. Only I showed up in person. Hair pulled back, suit pressed, walking tall with Eleanor beside me, I opened the courtroom door like a resurrection. The look on their faces when they saw me alive was something I will carry with me until the day I truly die. Justine gasped and stumbled back like I was a ghost come to haunt her. Gregory's mouth fell open and stayed there, and Peter muttered, "You're not supposed to be here." I walked to the front of the room and introduced myself calmly to the judge. "My name is Margaret Elaine Foster, and I am not dead." What followed was the slow, painful destruction of every lie they had told. The judge reviewed the forged documents Justine had submitted. Charles provided notarized evidence showing I had never willingly signed over the house. I stood silent while my daughter crumbled in front of a judge who informed her that she could be facing criminal charges for fraudulent conveyance of property. Gregory attempted to shift blame. "We thought she was gone, Your Honor. We didn't mean any harm." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Planning to sell her home before confirming legal death? That's not just insensitive, that's exploitation." When it was over, my children left that courtroom smaller than I had ever seen them, no longer towering over me with entitlement, but shrunken under the weight of their own exposure. Outside, Gregory caught up with me and asked me, "Why would you do this? Why would you fake your death?" I looked him in the eyes and said, "Because it was the only way I could see who you really were without your masks on." He didn't reply. What could he say? I walked away from that courthouse not as a victim, not as a grieving matriarch, but a woman who had taken back everything stolen from her, one silent move at a time. That night, Eleanor poured me a glass of red wine, and we toasted. Not to revenge, but to clarity. to the power of truth, to the rare aching relief of finally knowing exactly where you stand with the people you once would have died for. The aftermath of unmasking my children didn't bring me joy. It brought me silence. And in that silence came a deeper kind of grief than I expected. I had imagined that seeing their reactions, watching their schemes fall apart, would feel like victory, but instead it felt like a eulogy for the mother I used to be. I spent my days quietly sorting through the remnants of my life, digitizing photos, shredding documents that no longer meant anything, and boxing up trinkets that used to hold sentimental weight but now felt hollow. The house, legally and emotionally reclaimed, no longer felt like home. Every room carried a shadow of betrayal, and I knew I couldn't stay. So I told Charles to prepare it for sale. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I didn't want to live in a graveyard of trust broken. One Sunday afternoon, as I sat in Eleanor's sunroom journaling in silence, there was a knock at the door. Not frantic, but hesitant, careful. Eleanor peeked and turned to me, eyebrows raised. "It's your granddaughter," she whispered, "the youngest one." My heart stilled. Sophie. The child who had posted a filtered Instagram story about me the day after my death and vanished since. I hesitated, unsure if I had space left for more disappointment, but curiosity won. I opened the door to find her holding a wrinkled envelope, her eyes glassy. "I found this in Mom's attic," she said quietly. "It's from Grandpa's journal." Inside was a page torn from Harold's notebook, the handwriting unmistakable. It read, "Margaret gives more than anyone I've ever known. I hope our kids grow up to see her the way I do. Full of fire, full of love." My knees nearly buckled. Sophie saw the shift in my face and stepped closer. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know how they talked about you. I didn't know Mom forged things. I didn't know how fast they moved to get rid of everything. I thought they loved you." She blinked away tears. "But after the funeral, something didn't sit right. I started dreaming that you were watching us, and you were disappointed." I let her inside. We sat at the kitchen table where Eleanor had once served me tea after the memorial, and I listened as Sophie unraveled the twisted thread of guilt that had tied her to silence. She told me how Justine had laughed while sorting through my clothes, how Gregory had already made an offer on a new sports car, and how Peter bragged to a friend that the old lady left just enough to make it worth the wait. Sophie had been silent out of fear, afraid to lose her place in the family, afraid to question the adults she'd trusted. But watching it unfold had broken something in her. "I want to make things right," she said. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to be different." I didn't forgive her, not immediately. I didn't offer warm platitudes or rush to embrace her like a movie ending, but I listened. I let her return the next weekend and the one after that. I watched her volunteer at the shelter I had started supporting in Harold's name. She read to seniors, helped sort donations, asked questions about my life with sincerity. She wasn't trying to get anything. She was just trying. 3 weeks later, I brought her with me to the house. It was dusty, but intact, untouched since the legal lockout. She walked through each room quietly, her eyes landing on framed photos, faded handprints, birthday banners that still hung in the storage closet. "You made a home here," she said softly. I nodded, and then I watched them rip it apart. I told her then that I was selling it. She didn't protest. "I get it," she said. "You can't build a future in a place that only reminds you of being erased." When the young couple moved in 2 months later, I left them a letter tucked in the kitchen drawer. "Fill this home with grace. Speak gently. Celebrate loudly. And never treat someone's love like it's disposable." Then I walked away. I found a small lakeside condo, 1 bedroom, big windows, peace. No memories that weren't mine, no creaking hallways filled with ghosts. Sophie visited often. She brought flowers, sometimes books, sometimes just silence. She introduced me to our boyfriend who offered to fix the leaky faucet without being asked. I started writing more. Letters to women like me, essays for newsletters, bits of memoir that might one day form a book. One day, a woman from my book club told her son who ran a podcast about my story. I agreed to tell it on one condition. No edits, no pity, just truth. He titled the episode "The Grandmother Who Faked Her Death and Found Her Life." It went viral. Thousands of comments poured in from around the world. women saying they felt invisible, daughters regretting distance, sons apologizing. Some messages were raw, others poetic, but all of them echoed the same quiet ache. I wish I had known sooner. I didn't reply to most. I didn't need validation. I had lived through a resurrection of my own making. My name was no longer something said in past tense. It was a warning and a legend and a declaration. I am still here. A full year passed since the day I vanished and came back sharper than ever. Not as a ghost haunting the ones who wronged me, but as a woman who reclaimed her breath after being buried alive by the people she once called her world. The lake outside my condo shimmered in the mornings, and the quiet that used to feel like abandonment now felt like peace. I had no interest in rekindling bonds with Gregory, Peter, or Justine. They had made it painfully clear who I was to them: a transaction, a house deed, a potential payout. I sometimes wondered if they sat around in silence now, if they avoided looking at old family photos for fear of the woman who rose from the dead to reveal just how deeply they failed. But their silence didn't sting anymore. It was a gift. I had space to think, to write, to reflect without flinching at my own thoughts. Sophie remained the only person from that side of the family who stayed close. She never asked for a thing, never tried to erase the past, just showed up and kept showing up, like spring flowers after a brutal frost. We planted a tree together in Eleanor's honor after she passed, an oak sapling in the center of the senior center's garden, where Eleanor used to bring soup and stories every Wednesday. Sophie asked me to write something for the dedication, and I did. To those who remind us we are not disposable, even when the world forgets. That day, surrounded by a handful of strangers and one brave young woman who had chosen to do better, I realized something I hadn't dared believe. I wasn't alone anymore. A few weeks later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a check for $5,000, unsigned, with a note, "I'm sorry, you are right." It wasn't hard to guess who it came from. Justine had likely realized what it meant to live in a house of mirrors with no one left to impress. I tore it up and threw it away. Apologies that arrive after exposure are not apologies. They're self-preservation. And I was done protecting anyone who wouldn't bleed for me the way I once bled for them. I started speaking publicly, quietly at first. Small rooms of women over 60 who sat with folded hands and open hearts. They told me their stories. They whispered about sons who vanished after college, daughters who only called when they needed babysitters, husbands who had died and taken their protection with them. And as I stood in front of them, I said the words no one had said to me when I needed them most. You are not forgotten. You do not have to disappear to be seen. The podcast invited me back. Then a news outlet wrote a piece titled, "How One Grandmother Faked Her Death and Became a Voice for the Abandoned." The story rippled. People started calling me a folk hero. I wasn't. I was just tired. Tired of waiting, tired of hoping, tired of dying quietly every year only to realize the people who claimed to love me had long since stopped noticing the sound of my breath. But if my story could wake even one person up, if it could make one daughter visit her mother, one son stop scrolling and start dialing, then it mattered. A week before my 73rd birthday, Sophie brought me a small cake and a letter she had written by hand. It said, "I know now what love is supposed to look like. I know because of you." I cried harder than I had in a year. Not because I was sad, but because something inside me finally healed. I had been erased, but I wrote myself back in. I reclaimed my name, my life, and my voice, and no one, no child, no lie, no silence would ever take it from me again. If you've ever sat in a quiet room wondering if anyone would notice if you were gone, let me tell you something. Some won't, but the ones who do, they're worth more than all the rest combined. You don't have to vanish to be heard. You just have to stop begging to matter. You already do. I tell the stories no one else dares to share. If you believe women over 60 deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and share your voice in the comments.